crazy feeling. Together, you and me, down this road of ecstasy. Sure, the world will love, but two can really truly be a feeling I can't explain. Love's just a simple word. I'll show you how I feel. It's you I'm thinking of.
Hello, how's everybody doing tonight? That's what I'm talking about. Woohoo! If you have yet to find a seat, please come on up to the front. Or sit where you are right now, because we're going to get started. Okay, hello, welcome. I am Maureen Cool, and on behalf of all of my friends at Blue Beginning, Indivisible, welcome to Show Up Chicago. Thank you guys for being here. Yeah, give yourselves a hand. If this is your first time here or you've been here multiple times, we are so happy that you are here. Thank you for showing up. Thank you, a big thank you to the Hideout for hosting us as usual. Thank you, Hideout. Please feel free to get drinks and be sure to tip the wonderful bartenders here as well. Before we get started tonight, we all do want to acknowledge that there is some unsettling news coming out of the Middle East. We're all feeling a mix of anger and grief and helplessness. So we're not going to pretend that it's, business as usual. There are things going on in the world, and it can feel strange or dissonant to talk about things like transit and city policy. But we did plan this topic quite a few weeks ago, and we are excited to share it with you all tonight because what we're getting at is something that's very essential. Government should work for the people. If we can't go to school or work reliably, how are we supposed to build the kind of just, responsive society that we want locally and globally? So we are not a breaking news show, as those of you who've been here before know, but tonight we are going to hold space for both things. So we're going to feel our grief and our awareness for what's going on abroad, but it's also very important to talk about the often unglamorous work of fixing what's broken here at home. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for showing up. Give yourselves another round of applause. I love a round of applause. So there's been a lot going on since we've last been here at the Hideout. 75,000 of us were at the No Kings rally recently. Yes, please give yourselves a round. Who was there? Can I get a show? Who was out there? Yes, thank you so much. This is awesome. Look at those amazing pictures. But also last month, the Illinois legislature passed a $55 billion budget without funding for transit reform like we had hoped for. I'm being told to find my light. All right. And in that budget, there was $770 million gap for transit funding services, which is looking like about a 40% reduction in service. Can you guys imagine 40% worse than what's happening right now? That's like if you're waiting for 20 minutes, now you're going to be waiting for 28 minutes. And I'm impatient, and that's not good, but this is also very serious. It's said that about 70% of CPS high school students rely on public transit to get to school. So this is important stuff. So here at Show Up Chicago, we wanted to know more. Wait, sorry, I have a couple more photos and this. We wanted to know more, and when we went looking for answers, we found a number of articles written by the very wonderful Manny Ramos, who is here tonight, an investigative reporter from Block Club Chicago. Tonight, we're also going to be joined by Cam Buckner, who is an Illinois state representative, former mayoral candidate, and self-proclaimed transit nerd. We have a phenomenal panel. We're so excited that you guys are here. I want to remind you all that this is being recorded for a podcast and radio show, so we won't have any Q&A during the panel up here, but we will have time to do that afterward. Our time is tight, so are our microphones. So you'll see there are some note cards around the seats. If you have a question throughout the panel, please feel free to write that down. Once we get to the Q&A portion, I will be specifically looking for folks who've written down their questions, had to, time to kind of marinate what you're wanting to know, and then we can ask our panelists afterwards. So with that, I am delighted as always to welcome to the stage Marge Halprin and Tom Moss.
Hello, thanks again for coming out. I am Tom Moss. Welcome to Show Up Chicago. It's a community gathering and political panel show presented monthly here at the Hideout. You guys can come on up and take your place. I'm Tom Moss with Marge Halprin. We're proud of the leader. We're proud. We're also proud. We're part of the leadership team for Indivisible Blue Beginning. So just to kind of underline what Maureen said, in addition to confronting all of the horrors, and I'm going to go ahead and sit down with everybody else, confronting all of the horrors perpetrated by this administration, we also must demonstrate that contrary to what they say, government can work for the good of the people and that Democrats can get things done. But we need more evidence to support that claim. Transportation policy could provide that evidence. It hasn't yet, but it will. Such a progressive policy would be about more than getting us to our jobs downtown crime-free, in comfort, and with convenience. It's about social mobility, neighborhood development, housing, and education, and on and on. It's a win that can change people's lives. So a great example of cognitive dissonance. We must pay attention to all the other stuff that's happening in the world, for sure, but let's also pay attention to the progressive values that we support, and let's prove government can make things better. And why not start with public mass transit policy?
Why does transit policy matter? What's the impact of a failing system? A system we think is failing now, can it be any worse? And what would that be like, as Maureen suggested? How can we fix mass transit for Chicago and the suburbs? Or maybe the question is, can we fix it? That's part of the discussion this evening with Cam Buckner, our representative, who's taken the lead on transit reform in Springfield, and again, Manny Ramos from Block Club. I'll start by asking you a general question. Why is transportation policy important to you? That is, why is this an issue that you're so focused on?
How'd you become a nerd, Cam?
Well, I'll say, as a young man growing up in this city, transit is the way I got to learn Chicago. It's the way I got to understand how it looked and how it felt and how it smelt. My father would often put me on the 103. I lived in Washington Heights and Roseland, and we would ride the 103 bus or the Ashland bus or the Halsted bus from beginning to end, or ride the Red Line from 95th Street to Howard to see Chicago. And it's really how I fell in love with this city. And so when I think about mobility and people getting around, obviously there's some nostalgia there for me, but even more so, I see mobility and transit as a real civil right. I see it as a human right. I remind folks that when you look at the modern day civil rights movement in this country, while it was bred in the church and matured on the streets and at lunch counters, it really caught fire from the front of a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama in December of 1955, right? To me, that is why this is important. This is about how people live, how they function, how they get around every single day. And a society and a city and a state who can get this piece right, there's some hope to get everything else right. So if we don't figure this out, we're in some huge trouble. And so that it really is my affinity for this and where it comes from.
Yeah. Manny, you report on a lot of different things, but why this topic?
Yeah, I mean, a lot the same with Cam. I'm from Chicago, born and raised here as well. So I've never left. So I went to my grade school, high school, college. I went to DePaul University. So my life has been entrenched in the CTA, going to school, coming back and forth, jumping on a bus with my mom to go to the dentist or go do grocery shopping. It has really been a part of my life. But more than that, I'm also sort of like, I grew up as a hip hop nerd. So the aesthetics of like riding the train and listening to music was really a part of me growing up. which is why I love the CTA and I love transit just in general, and is sort of like the big motivating factor of why I choose to report on it today.
All right, I'm with you on all of that, I have to say. When I travel, I like to ride the trains in other cities. It's just interesting way to see a city, our own or any other. So you've both made this sound crucial to daily life in Chicago, and yet, though there was momentum behind your bill, it didn't pass. It was a combination transit and transit reform and funding bill. Governance was going to go together. You're always clear about that, Cam, and yet it didn't pass. So back to
passed
this
the Senate.
point. Yes, it didn't pass the House. It passed the Senate. We can get into the reasons they tacked some things on it that were not viable, I think. Well, tell us, why do you think it didn't pass, and what do you think about this idea that Democrats, that we started with, the Democrats have to prove government can work? I have to say, it's not working very well in this state right now.
So the reason that we walked away from Springfield on May 31st or on June 1st without a bill that passed both chambers really was solely about timing. We had spent a lot of time having daily negotiations about what a robust intentional transit bill would look like, one that dealt with structure and governance, but also with funding. Now, many of the folks who have been working on this for a long time, folks like me, like Representative Ebedina Delgado, who really helped lead this in the House, we said there will be no revenue without reform. Now, what do we mean by that? What we meant was that the state has to find the way to help financially, but we also have an opportunity to not just center this about money, but about service, about governance, about structure, not rebuilding the system that we had before COVID, but giving ourselves a chance to build a new system that's better than we ever thought of, right? And that was our intention, and it remains our intention. The Senate took up a version of that type of bill with revenue added in, which was something that we hadn't expected to happen. But they began to debate the bill at about 11:27 on the night of May 31st. So for those who don't know, May 31st is the last day of session. And there's some old stories back in the day about tomfoolery with the clock. They used to stop the clock to get what they wanted, because anything after 12 o'clock midnight then requires a supermajority. There are other things that kick into gear after that threshold is passed. And so when the bill got over to the House, it was about 11:57 p.m. Now, had we passed the bill that had substantial revenue enhancements in there with 3 minutes, people would have went crazy, right? And so what we did in the House was, we thought the responsible thing to do was to take a step back, to find time to reconfigure and figure out how we get to a bill that works for everybody. Now, the clock is ticking. I will remind folks that the service agencies, so CTA, RTA, Metro, PACE, unlike the state, they are on calendar budget years, so their budget starts on January 1st, unlike the state where we start on July 1st. And so there is a little time there, not a whole lot of time to get this right, but we've got to signal to them that we're going to be there, that there's going to be some money involved, and get them ready to start budgeting for this. And just, I'll wrap up by saying, to your points that you guys made earlier about what's going on around the world, whether it's in Gaza or Rafah or Kiev, it really underscores why we have to make it so that government works for people here. These are not just buses and trains, right? This is what people use to get to class and to church and to chemo, right? And so if we can't, once again, center people in this conversation, then we've missed the boat. But I choose to believe that we're going to figure out a way to do this in the next few weeks, months.
So, Cam, you talked about governance as a prime factor in the new bill. I'm not even sure what to call it. Does it have a name? MMA is the old bill, and NETA is the new. What do you call
We'll
it?
call it NETA. Yeah,
NETA?
NETA.
Let's, just for the sake of argument, we'll call it NETA tonight.
Because we need a bill.
Need a bill.
We
There
do
you
need
go.
a bill.
There you go. And anyway. Manny, I wonder if you could maybe walk us through what that governance currently looks like in its, what I think may be a messed up structure, Cam may agree. and then, where things stand. And then, Cam, maybe you can follow up with what the bill means to do to address that.
Sure. So at the moment, we have what's called the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority. And what that does is that's sort of the governing agency of the CTA, Metra, and PACE. And they're solely basically responsible of basically approving the budgets of these three agencies. And then from there, you have each agency has their own governing body that dictates their day-to-day operations, capital spending, capital investments, and services, and those basic essentials like that. Then if you break that down even further, these boards that sort of like dictate everything they tend to be political appointments. I've written extensively on the Chicago Transit Authority's board and how historically that board has been used as sort of a politically plumb position for the city of Chicago. I think in the last, over 50 years or so, there's only been like maybe 2 or 3 transit experts on that board, but countless, political proxies in there sitting there trying to get the mayor's doing. So that's sort of like the big problem with a lot of these boards is they're seen more so as rubber stamps for leadership within the CTA or in Metro or PACE or whatever, than they are sort of actually governing the body. So what they're trying to do in Springfield, and Cam can correct me, is sort of like address that problem so that there is more structure and more adherence to actually following and holding people accountable.
Isn't there an issue with the RTA board, which is supposed to have oversight, but also has these political appointees, so that in order to get a majority, well, correct me if I don't quite have it right, but I believe in order to get a majority to pass anything, they can be stopped by any one of the factions, whether it's the group appointed by the county, the group appointed by the city, or the group appointed by the state? Is that the three that happened?
Requires a supermajority, I believe.
Supermajority. That's right. And so over the years, that has created a bit of stasis and recalcitrance on that board. It also has created these very weird turf wars that have bled into service structure, as far as I'm concerned. And it really is why within these systems, you see a lot of competition and not a lot of collaboration. Even now, as we negotiate this bill, you see many of the suburbs saying that the city is the big boogeyman that they don't want to, sit at the table with, and the city is saying the same thing. Well, we've got, X amount of the riders, and so we should get this much money, and the suburbs are taking from us, and it just breeds this nasty kind of competition that we have seen for a long time. And so we are trying to cut through that and to do something different to once again create opportunities for collaboration and for people to do things in a way that really benefit the customer. And once again, these are not just, I like to change the nomenclature. Yes, this is about taxpayers, but these are paying customers who get on the system who expect a certain type of service, and therefore they should get it, right? They don't care how many folks the county board president put on the board or how many people the Senate president fought back against, right? It's about making sure that the buses and trains run on time, that they're clean, that they're safe, that they're reliable. And so a lot of the work that we've tried to do around the board structure is, to Manny's point, making sure that we have experts in these spaces, folks that know how to run these types of systems, because we need it. Unfortunately, for far too long, you've had folks who didn't have a clue running these agencies or being on the board of these agencies, and as Tom said, they were really just a political plum position and a carrot to hand out to somebody who was a supporter. This is Chicago, right? I understand how that works. That's fine when things are okay. But when we're in chaos and crisis, you can't do that. Anybody can do the job when everything is going okay, right? If everybody cleared out of this bar and you put me behind the bar and made me a bartender, I'll be the best bartender that Tim ever hired here if I'm not serving anybody, right? If there's not a crowd here, right? And so what we have tried to do is cut through the madness that is there and do things a little differently.
And just to put a finer point on it, the RTA has 16 board members. By my calculus, 5 are appointed by Cook County organizations. 5 are appointed by the mayor. Supermajority is 12. The city can shut down legislation or an ordinance, and the county could as well. So if you tried to design a board that wouldn't work, would be inefficient, you couldn't do any better than this.
And
That's
I would
right.
add a little background because I was a consultant to the RTA probably 15 years ago at least, running a communications summit. So the representatives of each of the agencies came together to talk about how to collaborate on schedules, how to set up a cohesive fare system that everyone could use at every one of the agencies. And it broke down because Metra at that time was run by a man named Phil Pagano, who liked his own fiefdom and would not allow his representatives to agree to anything. So I don't even know why they sent them, but there was a sham of an event because everybody else said, yeah, let's do this. Metra said, well, we'll get back to you over and over again. They couldn't agree because it was the suburban city issue to a large extent. There's been some movement since then, coordinating some schedules. You can use your Ventra card in some ways, and in some ways you can't. This has been decades. It's not, the cliche. It's not rocket science, but it's not even hard to do in the digital age, and yet they're still arguing over much the same things. We wanted a regional advertising campaign. Take mass transit, whether you're on the CTA or Metra, it's all good, but they wouldn't even agree to that. And there still is not anything cohesive like that. Why is it so hard? Manny, you must ask this question of members of the board or representatives of the service providers. Why do you think it's been so hard?
I don't know. Cynically speaking, I think it's all about power. I think these folks have power. I mean, specifically me, I've reported extensively on former CTA President Dorval Carter. Historically, for the past 5-6 years, he's been known not to speak with elected representatives. I think Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle even came out and said she had money she was willing to give him, but he wouldn't even meet with her. And he was known to not want to collaborate with other folks within Metro or PACE. So I can't get into the minds of these folks who run these agencies, right? But as a person who is just cynical by nature, I would have to assume it has to deal with power.
We could have a little conversation about why that makes somebody powerful to turn down money to expand their empire, but I don't know. He's not here to answer for
Take
himself.
the money, then you have to improve things. You have to do something, and you have to be
You're
accountable
held
for
accountable.
it. Cam, so getting back to the NITA bill, so how will that change the governance of the RTA? Does the RTA remain, or is it subsumed by something else?
So the RTA is subsumed by NITA, right, the Northern Illinois Transit Authority, which becomes a much stronger version of what the RTA is supposed to be. To Marge's point just a minute ago about the silos that these folks have operated in, whether it's marketing, whether it's legal, the truth of the matter is that if you pull the records to see what CTA, Metro, PACE, RTA are paying separately for lobbying in Springfield, it'll paint the entire picture for you. It's a lot of money. When a lot of these efforts can be consolidated, right, and you can get more more bang for your buck. But when I look at the history of how we got here, 1974, the RTA Act, 1983, the revamping of that act, 2008, which was another transit fiscal cliff that was dealt with, and now we find ourselves here. None of those pieces of legislation went far enough. They were all money-based. None of them went far enough to talk about how to fix structure and governance, which is why we started there. And so what NITA will do is all of those things that RTA was supposed to be doing. The folks at RTA work hard. I'll say this. I'm a fan of Kirk Dillard as a person. I think his heart is in the right place. I blame the legislature previous to the ones that I've served in for not giving them the tools to do the right thing, right? RTA in many ways is a shell organization and not a May, right? A May organization and not a shell. You may coordinate on fares, you may do the scheduling thing, you may do group marketing campaigns, but no shell, right? And so I don't know, how many of you folks have kids at home, but we've got 2 boys, and one of them is here tonight with me. But if I tell them that they may go to bed whenever they want to, the one that's here is gonna go to sleep because he likes to sleep. But the 3.5-year-old, Lionel Richie all night long, right? And so, that is the way RTA has unfortunately had to operate. And so this is also why we're taking our time to get this right, because the legislature needs to be instructive on how this should work.
So how would this just to be very specific, how would this give the muscle to the RTA so that they can tell the agencies what they shall do?
Funding. They'll be able to pull back funding, right? They'll be able to also look at data and say, well, if CTA, Metra, PACE is not hitting these marks, then they've got to come into the principal's office and have a conversation. I know Manny talked about the budget mechanism a little earlier. Even in that space, I can't tell you any time in the last 30 years, maybe someone else can, where RTA has actually said no to CTA, Metra, or PACE's budget. It just doesn't happen. So they've been a rubber stamp when it shouldn't work that way. And so we've given them some teeth in the bill in its current form to pull back, to have some direct punitive measures over the CEOs of these service board agencies as well. We're continuing to fine tune some of that to see what it looks like, because we are, even though that version of the Senate bill did not pass, we're having conversations about what a better bill looks like that we can hopefully get through before this year is over. But that's one of the tools.
So each of these power centers would give up control over their budget. I think now we are beginning to understand why they have had such a hard time getting approval for this. Who has been involved, or maybe a better question is, what's happening to the leadership in these jurisdictions, whether it's Preckwinkle for county, Pritzker, or other legislative leaders, the mayor here in Chicago? Where are they on all this? Did they support this bill?
So there have been a lot of questions about that, and I want to first say that as a co-equal branch of state government, as the group that folks always come to when the money runs out for transit, it was very important to folks like myself, once again, Rep. Delgado, Senator Villavalum, Speaker Welch, President Harman, that we lead the way. And so a lot of people have been pushing back because they want to know where the governor or the mayor were on this. And I think rightfully so, they did what we asked them to do and allowed us to operate in this space. Now that we are where we are without it having gotten over the finish line in May, I expect for them to realign their engagement because we're going to need them to get this over the finish line. I think Governor Pritzker has signaled that he's willing to do that. I know the mayor has as well, and I want to say that we've talked to all the county board presidents in the collar counties, including Deb Conroy and DuPage, who's been really good at helping us work through some of the suburban issues here, and she's a former colleague of mine who's in the House. And President Preckwinkle has been fantastic on this. Her and I probably had our first conversation about this a year and a half ago, and she stayed on it. She cares a lot about the policy down to the minutia, and I think her advocacy is going to help us carry the day on this as well.
Should the mayor have been in Springfield in those final hours?
For a lot of other things, probably yes. Transit as well. Obviously, and listen, I've said this publicly before, I think every administration has to find what their cadence is and how they operate within the walls of the state capitol. I think this administration is still figuring that out, right? And so, but I will say he and I spoke about this a number of times. I know that they were tracking it, and I think once again we've got new opportunity now for people to be more involved and more engaged.
So what happened with the Senate bill is they tacked on funding, as you said, most notably that $1.50 fee for deliveries of food and packages. It exempted food only and prescription deliveries, but it still was pretty controversial. Manny, as you covered that, it was a surprise when that popped up. It was an 11th hour thing. There must have been a lot of pushback on that. What did you hear in response to that proposal, and is that really what sank the whole thing?
Yeah, because I think what first came out was just the governance reform, which had folks sort of like, okay, well, this doesn't fix the fiscal cliff, right? So when we got the funding package or the proposal that would sort of like fill a lot of those holes, which I think the the service charge on ride shares, I think, would bring in like close to $1 billion alone, right? Which is it's a lot of money to fix that gap. The problem seems to be around Collier County Republicans who didn't want to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Cam, want to sort of like have another tax that we're going to sort of impact or just be funneled in to sort of bail out Chicago. That's sort of like the big problem right now with sort of trying to get that through. They sort of looked at it as a measure of bailing out Chicago, and they weren't really buying that. But that was sort of the surprise in it.
So this whole thing about transit being about bailing out Chicago, this has been back to those decades that I worked in this area, as I mentioned earlier. It was impossible to, that's what our ad campaign would have been. It would have been part of showing people how transit is a regional project and a regional amenity that helps people come to and from the city for their jobs, for recreation, for other things. And I mean, major government offices are downtown, and there are reasons why people from the suburbs want to come here. Cam, we've made no progress in that argument. We still see this as city versus suburbs.
Yeah, we've actually gone backwards, unfortunately. When you look at the history of this state and this region when it comes to that conversation, it almost feels like we were at our strongest point in the early 1970s when Republican Governor Richard Ogilvie, who that little train station in the West Loop-ish area is named after, when he said under great political pressure that the only way for a system to work is for it to work regionally. And so he created the RTA with the help of the legislature to do exactly that. But we've really settled back into this addiction that we have to us versus them, right? Suburbs versus city. We can't bail out Chicago. And whatever that means, right? What I try to remind my colleagues, both Democrats who are outside of the city of Chicago and Republicans in the Collier counties and around the state as well, is that I look at this system and the way it should work like a bike wheel. Anybody bike here? I'm sure there's some bikers in the building. There you go. The hub is necessary for your bike wheel to operate, but so are the spokes, right? And if they are not interconnected, if there's not the right amount of tension and push and pull, then your bike wheel is not working, and therefore you go nowhere. We've got to get past this suburban Chicago beef when it comes to transit. There's not competition. We don't need to compete. We just got to work together.
Is that attitude reinforced by the fact, and people who don't take multiple systems may not even realize that they don't play with each other, they don't talk to each other. You cannot transfer from Metro to CTA, Metro to PACE. It's not as if people who live in the suburbs are not commuting, many of them, to the city. The near suburbs on the south side, maybe even especially so. So does the NETA bill address that issue? And do you think once that's addressed, maybe we can start to get over this push-pull between the suburbs and Chicago? Yeah,
so as human beings, we're, I think, often captured by the past, and we do things the way we've always done them because that's the only way we think we can do them, right? But NETA does require some scheduling coordination, which I think is really important. And hopefully that can highlight and underscore what a system that works together looks like, right? So we need to talk about marketing and procurement and legal and lobbying and all of that stuff. That's super important. Purchasing, all that is important. But literally, last summer I went to go visit a colleague from Rockford, Maurice West, and we decided to meet halfway between the city and Rockford, and we went to, I don't remember which suburb it was, but I took the Metro up and then to the restaurant. There was supposed to be a 10-minute PACE ride. The moment that the train pulled up, the PACE bus pulled off before anybody got off. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense because I bet there are other people on this train like me trying to get on this bus, right? But that's commonplace for us now. We're used to it. And so the bill does require some things that changes that, and hopefully that changes our thinking.
So Manny, I want to talk, get a better feel for what the impact of not passing this bill, of not addressing the fiscal cliff would be. One of the headlines from one of your stories recently is that 1 in 5 Chicagoans lose access to transit if the bill doesn't pass. Can you talk a little bit about the effect of not passing this bill?
Yeah, so the RTA came out with a report that essentially highlights the many problems that many Chicagoans will face if a funding bill for the transit is not passed. I should say, this could be an exaggeration of sort of ringing the alarm in a lot of ways, but also it could be true, right? Who knows? But with that said, we're talking about 1 in 5 Chicagoans would probably lose access to some form of transit. I believe 60% of bus services or 40% of bus services would just disappear. 2 transit lines would also disappear, I believe the yellow line being one of them. So, I mean, this would be dire for the city. We're talking about folks who rely on the transit or trains or buses to, go to doctor's offices, go to, everything, to school, to whatever you need to do, right? So the effects would be profound. If a bill isn't passed, they're working on budgets now because they have to pass a budget by November. So they're hoping the state can get something done this summer, if not, sometime in the fall or whenever they reconvene. They're already making several different scenarios on what would happen, but if nothing is done, they're looking at earliest cuts to be March 2026. And I think something that should be noted as well, along with these cuts, come workforce displacement. So we're talking about bus operators losing their jobs. We're talking about rail operators losing their jobs, customer service positions, and sort of what that effect will be on the city itself when we talk about unemployment numbers. So this is a huge issue that is, that would impact us all around. I was speaking with a bus operator for the CTA who said, she could be receiving a pink slip anytime. She's not sure when. There are some rules behind it on when they got to notify them. But she's putting off plans to sort of buy a house that she was, her and her husband were looking for. So those are just things that are just percolating behind workers' minds as well that we should all pay attention to.
Could I ask you also to talk a little bit about the red line extension, where that is at the moment? I know it's US DOT money, so that's an open question. Yeah. But also what effect the fiscal cliff would have on that project.
So, I mean, at the moment, it seems like funding for that is secure, right? They were able to secure from the feds. The problem with that is we don't know what will happen with this new administration. Everything that we thought was sort of settled and paper and written in stone doesn't no longer seem to be the case. And then also, this project continues to get more expensive every year, or every month it seems like at times. So at the moment, it seems like this project is safe, but honestly, I don't have a magic ball or whatever.
And it's meant to connect, 95th to
133rd? Or, yeah.
Okay.
And does it connect with Metra? Because a lot of Southsiders do take Metra.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
So I read something about the Metra Electric, that if the red line extension happens and it's integrated with Metra Electric, then there's currently people within that are 6 miles away from a train terminal, that problem goes away. And what are the chances of that, I guess?
Well, I mean, there was, I believe, and Cam's probably way more knowledgeable about this than I am, but there was plans to sort of retrofit metro lines down there to give access to CTA, to sort of utilize those metro lines that were never really explored, but it was a possibility. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about the CTA.
Fair enough. Cam, anything to add to what you know about that?
I will say, while it does appear that the red line extension is a done deal, and the price has ballooned over the last couple of years, we are on guard, on watch for what happens in Washington, D.C. I think that there are many of us who are just hopeful that this remains under the radar of the administration, because as long as they don't know about it, they can't pull it. And I think that they're so busy doing other things, hopefully, that they're not really locked in on this. But there has always been a way for CTA and Metro to integrate to give more service to folks in that part of town. I grew up on the other side of the red line. I grew up on 103rd Street. And I can tell you personal stories through grammar school, high school, and then law school. Happened to find my way home on that last 2 miles between my home and the terminus of the Red Line. And so that's a big deal for many of us. But I also think that the focus that's been on the Red Line extension is indicative of what we've done wrong in this transit system. All the talk has been around that, but never like really connecting people, never finding a way for the Metro, the electric line and the South Shore line to connect with CTA or find ways to provide service for the people who don't have it right now. When we talk about, it's a whole nother panel, but when we talk about transit-oriented development, 10 years ago, the Red Line extension made a whole lot more sense when we were talking about actually standing up commercial corridors up and down my side of town where I grew up. Right now, none of that exists. There is no actual commerce there at all. And people are moving at an alarming rate. And so this seems to be a feather in the cap of the administration. I know that Dorval Carter wanted to do this so he can have his swan song and fly off to his next position. But I think that it's really disheartening that we weren't more intentional about this.
I want to ask about the replacement for Dorval Carter, because there was a bit of a controversy this week where the mayor said he was doing a national search. Turns out they did not do a national search. Manny, what is the latest on that you have found? And also, how does that impact people's confidence in how the CTA is being run?
Yeah, so that is a fun story. So I guess let's back up a little bit, right? There was a lot of speculation that Johnson's COO, John Roberson, was going to take over the helm at the CTA. This received a lot of pushback from transit advocates, as well as the board, surprisingly, essentially saying that he wasn't the person that was going to solve the problems of the CTA. He didn't have transit expertise, although he had extensive background in running agencies across cities. I mean, he has an extensive resume. He ended up leaving the city and moving to become, I believe, like the vice president of something at the Obama Foundation, the Presidential Library. This comes as Block Club Chicago asked Mayor Brandon Johnson about this quote-unquote nationwide search that he says that was conducted. He said that they ran a nationwide search, they conducted it, and nothing proved out of it. They couldn't find anyone during this search. Chicago Tribune wrote a story, I believe last week, that turns out they couldn't find any records of this nationwide search, that it was never conducted, or they couldn't find any records that show that it was ever conducted. And the city came back and basically said, the reason why that they're struggling to sort of fill this position is essentially due to the fiscal cliff, media hostility, and this basically,
Your fault, man.
Basically blaming the media. I believe Cam Buckner was also asked if he wanted to do the position, and he said he wasn't feeling it.
At one time, you were kind of feeling it, I thought, but not now.
So. To bring it back to what this means for the CTA and the confidence that the CTA has amongst people who rely on it, like me and everyone here today, I think CTA's confidence is at the lowest it's been since I've relied on the service, and I've relied on the service my entire life. I'm 34 years old now, so a long time. And it's really sad to say that, but, the mission of the CTA is extremely important, and Mayor Brandon Johnson said, when he was campaigning, that it was a priority in his to sort of make sure that CTA was running properly and correctly. I would just hope that he takes that initiative on moving forward and try to fill this position. There's a lot of great people across the country. We've seen great work happening in DC and sort of seeing how that transit system turned around, and it can be done here as well.
Cam, what do you think is the benefit of a national search? I mean, there are great people all over, as Manny says, but it's highly technical, highly skilled requirements there. So there's probably a limited number of people who could do this job. How would you recommend the mayor go about filling it responsibly?
I think national searches are helpful in positions like this. To Manny's point, Randy Clark, who is the head of WMATA, which is the DC Metro, for those of you who have taken the train and the buses in the nation's capital, has done a hell of a job turning that system around in a very short amount of time. There are other folks who, can, I think, fit the mold here. Obviously, as a homegrown Chicagoan, I am a homer. I do believe, that Chicago people are the best at everything. And so having someone with some real understanding of the city obviously is extremely attractive. But when I look at the large cities around the country and the large systems around the country, Chicago is very nuanced in the way our system operates for CTA in particular. And folks, especially more recently, have talked a lot about LA and Denver and comparing us with those cities. I think the only cities you can compare us to are Boston, Philly, and New York because of the legacy systems, because of the age of the infrastructure on top of the service issues and the money issues that exist there. And so someone who understands that would be helpful. But I got to say, listen, I think the most important thing for the mayor to do, and for any mayor that comes after him, is to make this a pillar, right? A working CTA, a flourishing and thriving CTA, a pillar of whatever your policy platform is.
I just want to ask a little bit about the other transit systems in the country. I was looking at, maybe testing your transit nerd credentials here. Fare box return. Let's talk about really dig into fare box return. But this is just the amount of money that in a systems budget that comes from what used to be the fare box and is now the scanner. So we're 45% fare box return, which is average. I think I'm looking here, San Francisco's at 50, DC's at 40, 45, New York's at 55. But then you look globally, Tokyo's at 90%, and Hong Kong's at 180%. So what are they doing that we aren't doing?
Yeah, well first, when you look at structure and governance and the way things run, right, they have a unified system that makes sense for everybody that lives there. They also are very transit focused, right? You'll see a lot of cars in Tokyo and Hong Kong, but it is a cultural thing when it comes to public transportation. Because of those numbers you just said, both Tokyo and Hong Kong have systems that pay for themselves. They're self-sufficient systems. They will never hit a transit fiscal cliff because they're not getting money from anywhere else but from the folks who ride the system, right? That's number one. And so there are some lessons we can pick up there. Some of the things that they do won't work here in this city or this country, but there are things that they do that we can absolutely piggyback off of and try to duplicate and replicate here. As far as fare box recovery ratio, right? So the numbers you just said were what's coming in on these systems on a yearly basis, but there's also there's what the actual numbers are, and then there's what the mandate is, right? So Chicago has a mandate that 50%, normally 50% of the budget money has to come from the fare box, right? In New York, that's about 25% at MTA. It's in the teens in the BART system on the West Coast and in the Bay. And so the first salvo, I think, in this fight was during COVID when we realized that we can't keep this requirement if there are not people riding the system. And so we suspended the fare box recovery ratio for the first time in 2020. And we've subsequently done it at least one more, maybe two times since then, because that old antiquated way of working the system and funding the system does not work for today's transit. And so, there have to be smarter ways to pay for a legacy system like ours. One thing I will remind folks is that CTA and Metra in particular, just those two organizations are not just rail and bus, right? They're two of the biggest real estate holders in the Midwest, right? What are we doing around that? And this is not just making sure that the storefronts in CTA train stations are operating and have commerce in there, but building houses and building multi-unit apartments and finding ways to create more density in this city in particular, it's all right there. But we got to stop making this just about buses and trains. This is about livability. This is about a big American city finding a way to move into the future.
So we wanted to save a little time for talking about what can we all do to help get past this fiscal cliff, to support mass transit. The fare box conversation is as good a place as any to start because we could ride it more and contribute more money. But Manny, aren't you finding, as we all do in our everyday life, that people have a lot of complaints about it? I live across the street from the Red Line station on Roosevelt. People don't want to step in there half of the time, certainly not after dark, because now we have more security guards and they got dogs, but you don't feel any better when you see them, and they don't ride the trains, they stay on the platform. So it doesn't always feel safe. It's certainly not always clean. I loved how you started, Cam, by saying it helped you get the smell of the city. I've been in those elevators. So, yeah, so there's a chicken and an egg kind of question, right, Manny? What do you hear from people about what it would take to get them back on the trains and buses?
Yeah, I like to put things in context. So, just let's back up again, right? There's always been problems at the CTA specifically. No agency is perfect. Every agency across the country, even the transit systems in Europe and in Asia, have problems as well. With that said, those problems at the CTA really became exaggerated coming out of the pandemic. Folks started noticing as they're waiting for the buses, these buses stop showing up. Their apps are telling them a bus is 3 minutes away, then it completely disappears, and now they're waiting 15 more minutes again. Trains, intermittently used to come every 5 to 7 minutes maybe. Now you're waiting 15, 28 minutes, right? Trains are smelling. People feel unsafe. I wrote a story when I was at the Sun-Times back in 2021, 2022, around that time, how violent crime was at its highest, in over the past decade in terms of per capita basis or per ridership basis. Folks just want reliable, safe, and clean services. That's the easiest and quickest way to get people back on the trains. And to provide safe transit, you need to provide reliable transit, where folks aren't waiting on platforms for too long. They're not waiting on streets for the buses to arrive. So frequency solves everything, I believe. And also you need frequent cleanings, all of these things, and community engagement. I truly believe that if CTA engages with the community, listens, and tries to just feel out exactly what community needs, they're always going to tell them they just want the buses and trains to run on time. But at least it opens it up to let people know that the CTA is listening and trying to sort of fix these issues.
So Cam, it's like a snake eating its tail problem here. I mean, we need cleaner, more reliable services, and to do that, we need more money. And to get more money, we need more riders. So how optimistic are you sitting here today about NETA and the future of transit in Chicago?
If this was only about the economic pieces, I would not be optimistic. I would say that we find a way to write the $1.5 billion check and then we give more of the same. But because we've taken the approach that we have, I have extreme optimism that things are going to be different, that we are going to shock the system so much that people will feel that there is something different, something tangible. And that is everything from cleanliness to security to customer satisfaction in this space. If you got on the CTA bus or a metric train in March of 2026, and after you tap your venture card, you get a text asking you how your ride was. You're like, who the hell are you talking to? This is new. I haven't seen this before, right? Or if someone tells you that there is a now contemporaneous texting program, so when you see something, you can say something, instead of having to get up while maybe an assault is going on in a train and push a button that is not safe for you to do, right? So you just sit there and mind your own business. Like, there are tangible things that people can feel. If they can feel a difference, they can feel the fact that that people are caring about what happens here, I think it will happen. It's going to be slow, but I think it can happen.
So you have a small army of activists here at your disposal. What do you need from Indivisible Chicago and people who care about this issue to get this across the finish line?
Ring the alarm. You've been doing that, but continue to push folks on how important this is. We need to also help people change their verbiage. This is not a bailout. There is no bailout for public transit. This is an investment in our city, in our state, in our region. It's extremely important. And we have to speak in those terms in order for folks to understand what this means. I think also it's really helpful for those of us who have the means and the ability to have this conversation in rooms with folks who don't take transit, folks who may hear the train but they don't know what's going on it, or folks who will say, well, I haven't been on the CTA in 40 years or 30 years. I think it's important to elevate this conversation in those rooms. There are people who rely on this system who are so used to government screwing them, who are so used to being left behind and in the dark and getting the rug pulled out from under them that they just expect it's not going to work. So they're not on Facebook talking about it. They're not going to rallies. They're not writing their legislator. They're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I think for many of the folks in this room and the people who you talk to and congregate with, you've got to be their voice as well because they need this system more than anybody.
And I might add, this summer, while we're all under construction on the highways, might be a good time to remind people that if we don't have reliable trains and buses, you're going to see a lot more cars on the Kennedy, the Edens, Ryan, whatever you take to get where you want to go. So maybe you don't need to ride the train, but you're darn lucky that so many people do, and they don't join you on the highway. I want to point out, too, that as an activist group, we're pretty good at contacting our legislators. We know how to lobby. We know how to fill out witness slips. So what are the things along that line? Are there particular targets that you would name or reference?
So I think most of the city legislators are really locked in on this and don't need a whole lot of cajoling to get there. I think there are probably a number of suburban folks who we can have conversations about and with in the coming weeks and months. But even if you live in a district where you're a senator and you're a rep, not only support this, but was even a co-sponsor of this, I would say don't take it for granted. Don't leave them alone. Have the conversation anyway. Remind them that they're doing the right thing by supporting this and push them. Marge always often remind folks that my grandfather was a Baptist preacher, and he would say, you can preach to the choir, but sometimes you have to preach to the choir to get them to sing, right? And so for folks like me who are in these spaces, push us, continue to have the conversation about why this is important.
Well, I'll add to that. If you do ride buses and trains in the city or the suburbs, talk to the people that you're riding with and make sure that they know that this is at stake, because a lot of people coming and going might not be aware. And this is sort of a pet topic of mine lately, because I heard a podcast a while ago about talking to strangers and how enriching these conversations can be. And I chat people up on the bus all the time. But you're making connections with people you don't know, but you have a lot of shared interests. And in this case, if you let them know, by the way, we're facing a potential 40% cut, you should be aware, and you should tell your neighbors and your family and make sure your alders, even in the city, have an impact, as well as your state reps. The city council passed a resolution supporting this bill. I don't know if that made a big difference, but the city's been behind it, and suburbs should be as well. So talk to whoever it is that you talk to and tell them about what you've learned tonight and how important you think it is to reform this system and keep our mass transit running.
I would say that it's likely that we would see daily actions on the web. So if people don't get the daily actions, Marge, what would you recommend they do?
IndivisiBleChicago.com is where you go, and when you sign up to get information, that may be how you found out about this meeting, but maybe you are not yet plugged in. Every day we give you 2-3 things that you can do easily. Sometimes it's those witness slips. When there's a hearing, I don't know if you're aware of what witness slips are, but you don't have to actually go to Springfield to be represented at a hearing. So when this bill comes back, when there are committee hearings, you can fill out a slip online and indicate your preference as a proponent of this funding bill or others that we will share with you, and you're counted. And there's a whole a fervent effort by both sides on any kind of legislation to get more slips and show the support for people who didn't come down to Springfield to talk in person. So our daily actions will tell you that. IndivisiBleChicago.com is where you sign up, and every day we'll send you a couple of things that you can do in just a few minutes to really make a difference on this and other issues that are happening locally, nationally, and now globally.
Before I close this out, Manny, any final words? Anything you're working on?
Ride the train.
Cam, last thought?
I agree. Listen, this is huge, right? This is huge, and we got opportunity not just to get this done, but to get this right. And we'll bring everybody along with us when we do this. But when you look at New York and Philly and Boston, no one has gotten this right yet. We've got a chance to lead, and we should.
And with that, it leaves it to me to say, Show Up Chicago is hosted by Blue Beginning chapter of Indivisible Chicago, as well as our friends here at the Hideout Inn. If you or your friends aren't here tonight, want to watch the show, you'll find it at youtube.com/Blue Beginning. Special thanks to Katie and Tim Tutton, Jody Boltman, Avery Reel, and the terrific staff here at the Hideout, including our sound engineer, Olivia Brunel. Thanks, Olivia. John Freeberg manages our broadcasting and recording. Thanks also to Lewis University for some additional technical support. Thanks to WCPT's Matt Cummings, Tim Hogan, and Mark Pinsky for broadcasting Show Up Chicago every Sunday, 7 p.m. Thanks to the Blue Beginning team, who in addition to Marge and me, we thank ourselves, includes Chloe Madvig, Maureen Kuhl, Nick Rabkin, and Mike Lenahan. And of course, one more big round of applause, please, for our guests, Representative Cam Buckner and Block Club's Manny Ramos. Thank you, gentlemen. So ends our broadcast, and thank you for joining us.
And now, my favorite part, the Q&A. Who has, I'm looking for, is he not here? There was somebody that was going to ask a question that spoke about it before. Okay, I'm going to hold the microphone. Oh, sorry. Do you want to read the question?
Yeah.
Okay, what's your name?
Michelle Davis.
And Michelle, what is your question?
Okay, here we go. Are there other metro areas that you have looked at? You mentioned D.C. The panel mentioned D.C. Have you looked at other metro areas and thought about models internationally that may be difficult, given the differences in terms of governing? But why D.C. in particular? What was there about D.C.? Because I lived there, a friend worked there for a long time. Used to take the metro train in and out of the burb that we live there. He was born there. My husband was born there. So I'm curious about D.C. and why you had mentioned that in particular.
I could take a crack at it really quick. So with DC, what they've been able to do is expand ridership really quickly coming out of the pandemic, much faster than Chicago has done. So much so that they're kind of knocking on the door of sort of being a more busier transit system than Chicago is. They've also expanded services as well, expanded times when they're operating. And then more so, Randy Clark, the head of WMATA, has been a very sort of figure within the system itself, sort of showcasing how important it is for a figurehead within the transit system to be present on the system, riding it, meeting customers, and really, hearing firsthand what folks are thinking about the system and being really a spokesperson himself.
And that was my biggest kind of nod to WMATA as well, is that Randy Clark, to me, really is the quintessential leader post-COVID in transit. As Manny said, he is very visible on the trains and the buses every single day. If you follow him on social media, that's all he ever posts, and it's himself riding also at the garages and the barns, so talking to the people who actually operate the system, which is a big deal now. Listen, I know that DC's rebound in ridership has gotten a lot of fanfare. Not putting an asterisk next to it, but it is important to note that they've got a little thing there called the federal government that made people come back to work in person, and so they rebounded a little quicker than most folks. And so acknowledging that, I just think Randy's done a really great job in that space. As far as other places, I spend a lot of time looking at, once again, New York, Philly, Boston, Boston's done some really interesting things. During the pandemic, what they did was they took their highest ridership corridors on the buses, on their bus routes, and made those free for a time to entice more people to get on it and to try to find ways to schedule around that. I will say that Boston has a mayor that was born in Chicago, because Chicago people do everything better. And so that may be why they did that. But there was a group of folks, legislators, who took a trip to Germany 6 months ago. Maybe I didn't make the trip, but to look at what consolidation and coordination looks like at the system in Frankfurt. And so we are looking at all these systems around the world.
I think I just want to add too, you mentioned social media. They have a pretty banging TikTok account. What's your name and what's your question? I'm going to hold the microphone.
Oh, sorry. My name is Mary. And my question is, so for funding, I'm curious, what is y'all's opinion on traffic congestion pricing as an alternative? Is this more or less viable? Is that political suicide? I honestly don't know.
I'll let Cam talk about political suicide. I think it works well. I think it's a great way to fund transit. I mean, we saw the success with it in New York. How New Yorkers themselves seem to like it. At first, they were kind of like skeptical, like, oh no, but then like New York's acting like, wait, there's not an hour traffic to drive a mile. I think it's a good fix for funding transit. I don't think it solves everything, but I think it is good.
Yeah, so cordon pricing, congestion pricing, it's an interesting idea. I think that there's ways that it could be helpful here in Illinois, in Chicago in particular. I want to caution, though, against the New York model, because they've got a bunch of different stuff going on there that we don't have here. Number one, MTA is a state-run agency, which we don't have literally a state-run transit agency here. RTA has state implications, right, but not necessarily a state agency per se. They also, which I think Governor Hochul was masterful, even with the hiccups in getting this through, because you're not just dealing with like Chicago and the collar counties, you're dealing with 3 different states, right? You got 3 different governors who have some say-so, and then you got, mayors and county folks, right? And so I think it's interesting to see how that is working. What I will say to that point is that one suggestion that came up when we were talking about raising money for transit was a surcharge on the Illinois tollway. It was roundly batted back as soon as it came up. I can't really tell you why, other than normal power struggles and power grabs. But I have been asking folks, and a lot of folks have pushed back on me on this, I've been asking folks to let's restart that conversation to see what it means. If for no other reason, 25%, a quarter, 25% of the trips on the Illinois tollway are from folks from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa. They're not Illinoisans. I can't name you one other revenue idea that would bring money in from a quarter of the money would come from someone that doesn't have to vote for me, right?
We'll
great.
get back some of the money we lose on gasoline.
And fireworks.
Right.
Cigarettes. All of that fun stuff that's on the other side of the border. So I just think it's worth a conversation, right? And we'll see what happens there.
What kind of money would that bring in? And like a 25-cent surcharge, something more?
So the initial idea was that it would be a $1 extra, a charge per trip. So a trip is just, once you get on that trip, that's for the day, right? No matter how many times you go back and forth, per day. And the initial number that we got back on that one was $350 million, which gets you pretty far down the road. Not there, but you got to piece together some things to make this happen. So it wasn't a small change.
So then maybe a smaller delivery fee, package fee, would be possible and less of a concern.
Yeah, I think for sure that, because I think that number is pretty high, right? So I personally was asking to bring that number down. and to find ways to do other things that were more transit-oriented, right? Like, for instance, what I've proposed is a large event fee, and so my friends at the sports teams are not going to be happy about this, but I've said it already publicly, so who cares? An extra $1 to $5 on, events at Wrigley Field, United Center, Soldier Field, not just the ball games, but think Taylor Swift, think Beyonce. And what we see, they do that in San Francisco and other places around the world. And what they also do is once you pay that extra $4 on your ticket, which you don't even look at, if you're going to pay $200 to see Beyonce, $204 is not going to hurt you. But also your ticket for that day doubles as a pass for the system. So you can ride CTA Metro Pace for the entire day, right? So that conservatively brings in about $100 million if you do it the right way. Lollapalooza is another one, like these large-scale events. So I think you can piece together the right thing and make the delivery fee not be as aggressive as it currently is.
We could double that for NASCAR.
Please.
Don't get me started.
Okay, what is your name and what is your question?
Yeah, my name's Hunter from River North. Good to see you again, Cam. So what does the coalition look like this summer to get this bill over the finish line? So since a simple majority is not enough, and I'd love for you to tell us like what the majority threshold is in the summer, like to get bills passed. What does that majority look like? Who are you cobbling together? Is it going to be an effort to get enough downstate Dems on board who aren't relying on Metro, Pace, CTA? Or are we going to have to change hearts and minds on these Metro Republicans, these people in Geneva and Dundee who come to our events, whose friends and family work in the loop, but yet they seem so eager to just let, Metro, CTA, and Pace fall apart? What's the strategy here? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so right now, now that we've passed May 31st, the threshold from the House went from 60 votes to 71 votes. And in the Senate, it went from 30 to 36 votes, right? So these are super majority numbers. I'm glad that you asked that question, Hunter, because what I have been arguing for and advocating for and what I hope that we get in this next round of conversations is a statewide bill that brings along our colleagues from the Metro East, from places like Champaign and Aurora and Rockford, because truly for me this is an opportunity not just to fix and fund CTA, Metro, and Pace. It's an opportunity to create a rail system in this state, which I think is the transit capital of the country as far as I'm concerned, and get this right. I do think, and not to cry over spilled milk, but I think that we missed a real opportunity with the former president to have a robust package that the feds could sign off on. We were so focused on rail line extension that we missed. We had the most rail-friendly president since Abraham Lincoln in office, and we didn't have a package for them to look at on how we bring the rest of the state along. And so when I look at the fact that Peoria has, I think, the country's probably largest inland port, there is no direct train access from Peoria to Chicago. That's crazy, right? When you think about the Quad Cities, how do you get to the Quad Cities from Chicago? It's very hard to do so. We've got an opportunity, I think, to bring Amtrak into the conversation and more commuter rail, other places as well, on how we create an entire system, right? And so SMTD in Springfield and MTD in Champaign-Urbana and MCT and the MetroLink on our border with Missouri. I think if we can put something in this bill for all of them to create a robust transit network throughout the state of Illinois, we'll get the votes we need, and I think we can do that.
Awesome. I think there was a question up here. Yes, I'm right here. What is your name and what is your question?
Hi, my name is Debbie Dan, and I'm from Old Town. And you were one of my top two choices for mayor. So it's great to hear you. Anyway, a couple of questions. I don't know what I'm asking in terms of what pot the money comes out of, but I see more and more routes being done for bicycles. We have inclement weather at least 6 months a year. People that are from the suburbs, that they're not riding their bikes into Chicago. It's a very, very rough thing. And what it's done is it's made driving traffic, which we need if we can't do rapid transit, so much worse for us right now. Is that money coming from the same pot that the money would be going to rapid transit, or is that a whole different situation?
Yeah, so the bike lanes that you see around Chicago are largely funded by CDOT. Some of them on IDOT roads get some state money, but to your point, I just want to say we have had, and we've missed it, but we've had an opportunity to create some real multimodal collaboration, which we have not done. The truth of the matter is that you may have CDOT putting in the bike lane over here and CTA flirting with a bus lane over here, but no coordination in that conversation. We need a regional kind of Burnham plan for mobility, so that folks who drive cars don't feel like the bike lanes are impeding on their space and taking up traffic, and folks who ride bikes don't feel like they're less safe because they're this close to a bus lane, right? Once again, this is a result of the silos that we have put ourselves in, and we got to work our way out of them.
And I think integration is a key point here, too. So while people may not ride from the suburbs into Chicago, they can certainly take the metro to a stop, north, and then ride, use it as their transportation within the city. I mean, that, I think, happens.
But if you're going to work, that's very difficult because people don't want to, when it's 100 degrees outside, how many people are going to arrive at work, dripping from sweat and, I mean, God bless them if they can, but I don't think that a lot of women would do it. I don't think that a lot of elderly people would do it. Okay.
Fair point.
I have one other question, and may I go off the topic? Because, no, okay.
All right, thank you. Yes. What is your
Afterward,
name?
informally, there might be some conversation. We're going to let others who might have transit questions step up.
What is your name and what is your question?
I'm Jack. I'm from Logan. I have a question about NEDA, the governance reforms. So it sounds like the RTA board is structured to prevent anything from happening. Maybe the more positive way to frame that would be it's checks and balances, right? There's power centers from each of the sort of areas of the state on the board to make sure that no one area is overrepresented in the RTA's budget or funding or attention. What mechanisms are in place to ensure that NEDA doesn't get captured by one specific faction?
So that was a lot of the conversations we were having at the negotiating table to make sure we weren't as a response to what's happening today, building something worse or building something that ends up doing the same thing that the other thing did, like Animal Farm, right? Creating this type of dynamic. The Senate's voting threshold is a little different than what was in the House bill, and that is part of some of what's still being negotiated on what that looks like. But that is our intention, to make sure that there is no one faction who can overtake or who can hold the rest of the folks hostage, right? That there is obviously checks and balances, but accountability, and it is because of the way it's set up in the best interest to actually move stuff and not sit on it, right? So we have not completely gotten to what the final version of that is, but it is making sure that that doesn't happen is something that's been very important to us.
Any other questions in the house? Yes, thank you. Hello, what is your name and what is your question?
Andy, Logan Square. I have two different questions that are a little bit different from each other, but one, you've talked a lot about Randy Clark in DC and Boston and Philly. I'm just curious, if there are other recent examples of this linkage that you're talking about, between a city transit system, suburban, collar counties, beyond, across state, if there's examples of municipalities where that's been done really well, linking those things where the linkages have existed less well before. Second question, totally different. Bike lanes. During the wintertime, we did a lot of biking, and I would encounter protected bike lanes that were not plowed, and it became really dangerous. And I'm just curious, how you, that specific thing, but beyond just like that concept of like things you may not think about that could then really preclude somebody's ability to take advantage of something that's otherwise really helpful? Like how you sort of try and foresee those and, sorry?
Plowing the sidewalks.
Plowing the sidewalks, for example, right?
So as far as systems where consolidation have worked or whatnot, I mean, MTA in New York, they did it decades ago, but it's a perfect example of what happens when you're really intentional. And once again, they're not just a city system, but you got Westchester County, you've got New Jersey, you got Connecticut, all feeding into the heart of New York City. And so I think that they did a pretty decent job at that. The only other real consolidation that I would point to that actually made sense and worked pretty well was the PACE. You know, the advent of PACE. There were a bunch of small suburban private bus companies that ran up and down the suburbs that found themselves in financial duress, which is why PACE was created, to consolidate them and to give them one bus system. Now, some of the political issues that existed within those municipalities became part of PACE's problem now, right? Like, the reason that to be on the PACE board, you have to be a current or a former mayor. That's because these mayors ran these bus systems, and now they still wanted some say-so in these conversations, right? And so those two are ones that I think are worth looking at and paying attention to. As far as being prepared for things like unplowed, protected bike lanes, I'm going to say something extremely a hot take here. Okay, it's a hot take. We're not on the radio anymore, right?
Off the record.
No. Believe it or not, most people who have spent any time in this city know that it snows here. And you would think that the folks in charge would have that in mind when you talk about built environment and infrastructure. Just one time, maybe 2 years ago, I saw a mini snowplow that was like really built for some of these very small one-way streets on the northwest side that was also able to do a protected bike lane, which I thought was fantastic. I don't know how many of them exist in the city. I don't know if there's a plan around for those things, but I mean, you're right. Why build it if people can't use it, right? And so, I don't know. I will say this, and I'll stop talking. In the 2023 mayor's race, I can say with confidence that for the majority of the race, there was only one person talking about true mobility infrastructure and what that meant. There was only one person talking about transit in this way and what that meant for all of us. I just would implore anybody who's running for alderman or mayor or state rep or state senator, if you are in the city of Chicago, this has to be a part of your platform. You have to have a real plan for what we do. And we can't just build bike lanes if we don't have a way to upkeep them. We can't just say that we care about transit if there's no actual plan for that. And so, you know, I griped for a little bit, I'm done now, but I think it's incumbent for folks in this room to push on people like me to make sure we make it happen.
Thank you. I
Not
think
a bad
that,
place
yeah,
to end.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We're so happy you guys are all here tonight. Thank you very much.